In this video, we're going to cover generals, which might not make a whole lot of sense if you haven't already had your intake. With homeopathy, we're looking at general symptoms, is what we call them, that could be how people are craving foods, what temperature they tend to be overall, if they're sensitive in general to light, sounds, or odors, if they tend to be really sensitive to criticism, sensitive to injustice, how much they like animals, how they like to travel, that kind of thing. So things that you might not think are related, although now that you've watched this entire series, hopefully you recognize how all of these things actually can be legitimately related to the symptoms that you're concerned about. This video is more to talk to you about the purpose of generals and how to revisit them to be useful throughout the process, rather than to go into specifics about how you want to talk about them. So Dr. Petersons, tell us a little bit about why stories are needed to help support generals, just like they're needed for all of the other symptoms that we've talked about.
Yeah, so in the generals section, you're going to see questions like worse from criticism. That can be interpreted a lot of ways. So strongly agree only gives us so much information. So really understanding, when I say this in this way, they do this. Worse from injustice, knowing an example of that. They're really, really emotional about politics, and they have been since they were 12. That's interesting. Or if they're really sensitive to animals, what do? Are they crying when they see a sad story? Giving us the details of those symptoms, especially if they change over time, because with different remedies, you may see that the generals change, and all of a sudden there's this over emotionality towards animals or children or sad stories or criticism or the inflection in your voice that changes, that tells us that we actually are changing state and need to change to a different remedy. So always looking back on those and seeing how they've changed.
Right. And so it's really useful, especially if you are feeling almost a little bit stuck. You could sometimes find some things in the generals that can help you get some good evidence or good support for another symptom that might be useful. So if you're somebody who has always loved chicken and suddenly the thought of eating any meat is disgusting, or eggs where you hated eggs so much, but now you want to eat 17 eggs a day. So food cravings changing. If you have always been hot, but now suddenly you're cold, that's going to be a useful update. If you've always been super thirsty and now you're thirstless, that's going to be a good update. If you have gone from being the person that's like hyper sympathetic and feels what other people are feeling all the time to being really callous and like you don't care and you're angry and irritable, like that kind of thing is going to be a really good indicator. So it can be useful sometimes to go back and review the generals form and just compare to what you had shared before to give us some insights into changing states. And when it comes to generals, especially if you're just getting started, we want to know where you're at right now, but it's most useful if you can tell your provider if this is different. So for instance, I was always like this, and then I got strep, or my kid got strep, and my kid went from being cold all the time to now being hot all the time. More useful than just like my kid's hot. So knowing that it is a change from their standard of how they are, that post illness or trigger or whatever it might be. All right, so this wraps up our series on being a better observer. Hopefully you found it really useful. We do recommend that you hopefully have watched the entire thing, and so now you're at the end of this series, but we made them available so that you can go back and watch the sections where you want to, and hopefully we've given you enough insight to know when like maybe you need to check out 2 sections rather than just one, because we just need to remember that our body and our mind, everything is connected. So what's happening in our poop is related to what's happening in our behavior, and what's happening on our skin is related to what's happening in our breathing. And so we might need to look at a couple of different videos to really get the complexity of the symptoms to really fully fleshed out. That's what I was looking for, fleshed out. So go ahead, Dr. Petersons.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and, don't get too stressed out. Just tell the stories, right? Tell the examples. Give us what you know, because what you know is probably what we need. So just keeping that in mind as you're digesting all of that.
And then the last thing that I want to say is like a word of caution is, if it's not clear, don't worry about it. So similar to like the don't stress about it, like what you see is what you see. If you don't have an answer, if we said something and you can't figure it out, or your kid can't explain it, or you can't possibly get that information, just give us what you got and we're going to work with what you got. This is just to help you get a little bit of understanding of the types of questions that we're going to ask, so you can feel a little bit more prepared for them and know what kind of things that might be useful to look out for and take note of that you might not think of otherwise. So hopefully this helps you be a really good observer and get even more benefit from your visits with your provider.